Nowadays, there are so many different ways to process coffee, a big range with so many different and exciting flavors. The two main ones though that we should really understand on the roast profiles and roasting side are natural and wash process coffees. I'm gonna walk you through my perspective and my techniques, how to get the most out of both of these processes on the Stronghold roaster. So let's go check it out. Right now, we are about to roast washed coffee. And so washed coffees they're super common. They're one of the most common processes out there, but let's talk about their flavor profile a little bit. So generally, they have a little bit higher acidity. They're less fruity, but with that lower amount of fruit, they can often have really interesting notes. They can have florals, they can have interesting tea notes. So even though it seems like a classic coffee, there's a big range of flavors you can get from them. What we're gonna do is work on a profile for a washed coffee to really accentuate the best qualities of that. So what I'm looking for in terms of a washed coffee is great acidity, super clean coffee, and then maybe some florals. We've picked a coffee today that I think is maybe one of the best washed coffees in the entire world. We have Takeshi Gesha. It is the classic Gesha. It's super floral, lots of tea, great acidity, and that is what we're gonna try and highlight with this roast profile today. So I'm gonna load 600 grams. I'm at 8 for hot air, 8 for halogen. This isn't the max of the roaster. What we're gonna do is actually apply a little bit of heat right after it has turned to make sure that we have lots of momentum to get a really great, vigorous first crack. So one of the keys for roasting washed coffees that have large amounts of florals is that you want to make sure you have a lot of energy near the end of the roast. So I'm going to make sure in these initial parts that the roast has enough heat that's going to carry all the way to the end. If you think about florality, it's a very volatile flavor compound. And so what we want to make sure is that we develop it with a lot of energy, but that we don't extend the roast so much that it is lost. Because you can create that floral, and in a moment, it can leave. And so what I'm going to try and do with this roast is get a bunch of florals into the cup, and then drop the roast early enough that we've preserved all of them. I'm going to wait a little bit longer at 8.5. And then after the roast starts to turn, once it's peaked on its ROR, I might add a little bit more heat just to make sure we preserve a nice high ROR, because for floral coffees, that's gonna be really important going into first crack. I still like to use a lot of halogen, even for washed coffees in the initial stages. I think it helps dry the coffee, it helps the coffee open up, and it's gonna give us more even development later on. So you can see I've just lined up with my reference there. I'm gonna start to apply a bit more heat. This is gonna make sure that this roast has enough heat at first crack to really develop those florals. So we're gonna go up to 9.5. On this roast, because I wanna preserve florality, I'm gonna use halogen just in that first half. Once the coffee starts to brown, once it is a light tan or a light brown, that's when I'll really start to pull the halogen out of this roast. A big part of why roasters prize florality in coffees is that they are so rare, both in the way that we produce coffee. Not many coffees have really great florals, but also in the way that we roast them, where it's a really hard thing to have a floral coffee and keep that florality throughout the roast. I think the Stronghold does a great job preserving these notes that are not only rare in farms, but also rare in roasted products. We'll pull a bit out of the drum heater. Today what we're using with the drum heater, it's not to add too much development to the coffee, it's not to apply too much heat. For me, what it's gonna do is at first crack, I wanna make sure that drum heater is warm enough that any of the coffee that's in contact with metal isn't gonna stall. It's gonna give us a more even roast and greater intensity in the cupping table. I'm gonna pull a bit more out of the drum heater. Once the coffee starts to yellow, we're probably almost there. I'm gonna start to pull down the halogen. I'm gonna add a little bit more to the hot air, just because we're gonna transition from that halogen heat to more air heat to preserve the momentum that we have and keep this roast moving along. So halogen's gonna go down to 6, and we're just gonna add a little bit of heat. I'm not gonna keep it at 10 for too long, just enough to make sure that we don't have a big change in ROR as we move from halogen and start to step that down. We have a really gentle yellow right now. I'm gonna step it down again. We're kind of an orangey tan right now. It's almost heading into brown. I have a little bit of halogen on just to help move us along. But at this point, most of the heat's just coming from that hot air. I'm gonna move my drum heater down again. And then the big key is just making sure we have good momentum headed into first crack. I'm gonna pull a bit of hot air out so we don't come in too fast. Now, this Takesi is a very, very dense coffee, which means that even though it's drying, even though it's brown, there's still moisture in that cell wall. And so when we hit first crack, it's gonna be an aggressive first crack. It's gonna release a lot of moisture. And so for coffees that I find have an aggressive first crack that can really slow down the rates, I'll actually apply a little bit of heat. You will not see an increase in heat in the environment. What it's just doing is plateauing the heat in the air, and that's gonna allow me to hold that rolling first crack. So it'll look like an increase in terms of my settings, but in terms of the actual temperature in the drum, it's mostly just holding that so I can keep that first crack going and rolling even though it's releasing a lot of moisture. So my halogen's gonna go all the way up now as we get ready for first crack. I'm gonna go down to 9. Slow it down just a bit more. I want to be around 7 for this coffee in terms of my bean service RR. That's going to be a really healthy first crack. You can hear cracking, we're at 7.5. I'm going to wait for one more pop just to make sure that we actually are there. See, sometimes you'll get a rogue one that pops and we want to make sure that we're right in first crack when we mark it for development time. There we go. I'm gonna add a little bit of heat. And again, this is just plateauing that environment to make sure that that crack's gonna be rolling. Because we wanna get a lot of the development done in a short period of time to preserve those florals. We're only looking at about a minute to a minute 15 for our development time. So I wanna make sure that this first crack is really rolling and you can hear it. This is an aggressive, intense first crack, but it's just developing a ton of beautiful florals right now. Even with this much heat, you can see my RR now is down to 4. It's down to 3. So you can see even though we applied all that heat, it's still slowing down. As we come up on where we're gonna be dropping the coffee, I'm going to start to slow it down just to make sure that we don't have any scorch notes at the end of this roast. We're gonna drop this for about a minute 5 development time is right where we wanna be. You'll still hear lots of pops in the tray. That's because you have a ton of energy. And this is a washed coffee.